So section 115, police exercising absolute care with everyone act. And you could probably guess by that flowery phrase that it's supposed to stand for something. And so the short title is the Peace Act of 2022. I think we talked about this a little bit at the last session about requiring de-escalation. And so let me just kind of go through this section. In short, it would require, it standardizes 3 levels of first, police officers would be required to try and de-escalate confrontations with people before escalating to less lethal force. And then if less lethal force and other alternatives had been exhausted, then deadly force would be an option on the table. And we'll go back to our definitions of what these things are. And we talked about deadly force means force which a reasonable person would consider likely to cause death or serious bodily harm, including the discharge of a firearm, a maneuver that restricts blood or oxygen flow to the brain, including chokeholds, strangleholds, neck restraints, neck holds, and carotid artery restraints, and multiple discharges of an electronic control weapon. Multiple uses of a taser can be considered deadly force. Less lethal force is just a simplified version of that. It's defined as any degree of force that is not likely to cause death or serious bodily injury. All right, so not later than February 28th of 2023, the Attorney General would provide guidance to federal law enforcement on the types of less lethal force and deadly force that would be prohibited under this section, and offer guidance into how federal law enforcement officers can assess whether the use of force is appropriate and necessary, and how to use the least amount of force in interacting with certain at-risk individuals. Those include pregnant individuals. I'm not sure if we talked about in the qualified immunity discussion last week, a woman who was tased multiple times and sued the police officers only to be told that they had qualified immunity for that. Children and youth under 21 years of age. This can really be a traumatic thing for a child, as we talked about the pointing of a gun at them. And unless there is absolute necessity for it, that sort of thing would be prohibited. Elderly persons, we saw, many of us remember the video from the George Floyd protests last year, the elderly man in Buffalo, New York, who attempted to talk to some police officers and was shoved to the ground and lay there bleeding from his skull. Roman 4 is persons with mental, behavioral, physical disabilities or impairments. Unfortunately, to the extent that we use police as first responders to people who are having mental health issues, it is especially important that we offer additional training on ways that they can de-escalate those situations and not respond with force. Roman 5 is persons experiencing under the influence of drugs or alcohol, and again, people aren't making rational decisions. They're not in the right state of mind. It's always best to try and avoid escalating the situation. Also, for persons suffering from serious medical conditions and persons with limited English proficiency. Again, miscommunications lead to tragic accidents sometimes. And again, so this section would require that federal law enforcement be trained in how to avoid escalating actions with people in these situations. This section would also prohibit an offense to any charges of murder that the officer's use of force was inconsistent with these. So in the case of George Floyd's death, for example, if the officers are charged with murder, they would not be able to defend to say that officers' use of such force was inconsistent with the de-escalation provisions of the section. And then once again, this section would offer the same carrot, use the same carrot and stick approach to the states. requiring states to implement these same training procedures for state and local members of law enforcement, and once again withhold burn grants and COP grants beginning in the 2025 fiscal year if they did not have a law on the books that that met these standards. I just, as I've worked on this, I was thinking about it recently, where we saw that case in California, where there was a man having a mental health situation in a sort of Burlington coat factory, and the police went charging in there and shooting and killed some innocent girl in a dressing room because the first thing they jumped to was firing off their guns. And so it's really important to change that model of behavior and try and train them to higher, better standards. And so that brings us back to the title of this section, the Peace Act of 2022.